reading today comes from the book of Joshua, chapter 24, and you can find that on page 215 of your pew Bibles. I will be reading verses 1 through 3 and 14 through 25. Then Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and summoned the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers of Israel. And they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, long ago your ancestors, Terah and his sons Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates and served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and made his offspring many." In verse 14. "Now therefore revere the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your ancestors served beyond the river in Egypt and serve the Lord. Now if you are unwilling to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors served in the region beyond the river or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." Then the people answered, "Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For it is the Lord our God who brought us and our ancestors up from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and who did those great signs in our sight. He protected us along the way that we went, and among all the peoples through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the peoples, the Amorites who lived in the land. Therefore, we will also serve the Lord, for he is our God." But Joshua said to the people, "You cannot serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions or your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do you harm and consume you after having done you good." And the people said to Joshua, "No, we will serve the Lord." Then Joshua said to the people, "You are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen the Lord to serve him." And they said, "We are witnesses." He said, "Then put away the foreign gods that are among you, and incline your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel." The people said to Joshua, "The Lord our God we will serve, and him we will obey." So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day, and made statutes and ordinances for them at Shechem. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Well, I've told a couple of you recently that often if I say I'm going to cry, I don't. So I'm going to start out today by saying I might cry, and bear with me. See, it started already. Have you ever been on a precipice, not exactly knowing what was going to happen next? That's where Joshua and the Israelites found themselves. They had been through a lot together. This isn't one of those stories we covered in our VBS for the rest of a series, but it very well could have been. Most of us probably know the story of Joshua and the Battle of Jericho from our childhood. But one problem with thinking about just a story is sometimes we miss the big picture. So let's back up a bit. Remember Moses? "Let my people go," parting the Red Sea, the 10 Commandments. Sound familiar? Moses had led God's people out of captivity in Egypt and then had wandered with them in the wilderness for 40 years. Moses was a great leader. And before he died, Moses chose Joshua to take his place, to lead the people into the promised land. Moses, who had led the people through such enormous change, passed on these words of hope to Joshua. "Be strong and bold, because it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed." I had Sophia bring me tissues before church started. Maybe that jinxed it. It was a new era. Most of the people who were alive then had never been in captivity. They had been born through the years of desert wandering and had never known what it was like to have a place called home. The promised land was in view. But the problem is, it was promised to them but held by others. In an incredibly violent story, God leads Joshua to take over Jericho by completely destroying it. According to the text, this is accomplished by Joshua and his men walking around the city one time a day for 7 days, and then on the seventh day walking around it 7 times. Let that sink in. The plan to destroy the city was by walking around it. It didn't make sense. It defied all logic and understanding. There wasn't any reason they could point to about why God had asked them to do this seemingly outrageous thing. The only thing that mattered was their faith, their belief that God would be faithful to God's promises. And God kept God's promises. And isn't this how it works sometimes? The things we're called to do just don't make sense. Then we get to the end of the book of Joshua, and it says, "Many years passed, and Joshua grew very old," as we do. Which brings us to today's text. Joshua had gathered all of the people together. He knew his time with them was coming to an end. He knew he would soon die, and the people would decide what was next. So he told them, "Choose this day." He reminded them that they had not always served Jehovah, the God of Israel. Remember that these were ancient people, tribal people, so it wasn't a matter of serving God or being atheist, the way we might think of it. It was a matter of who they served, the gods of the land, or the gods of their ancestors, or the God who had been faithful to them. For the ancient Israelites, and even for New Testament authors, they had no concept of believing in God. Believing and serving went hand in hand. For the faith to the Apostle Paul wasn't an intellectual idea, but rather how you embody what you believe. Faith is an action, not a thought. When Joshua tells the people to choose this day, it wasn't to say a prayer and be done with it. It was to commit to a lifetime of reflecting God. Choice after choice after choice. So you've probably gathered by now why I chose this text from the options for today. We too are on a precipice, at a turning point. We too are confronted with choices. We too are not sure what the next chapter holds. And we too know that it won't be written together. Next month, our faith community will go separate directions. I will be moving to San Antonio with my family. And yes, for those of you who have asked, that is different from the DC that we were told we were moving to several months ago. It's the way the Army works, it seems. At the same time, Pastor Nathan and his family will be moving to Atlanta. We are all on a precipice. There is a lot about the next chapter that we don't know. When Joshua spoke to the Israelites, he reminded them of the faithfulness of God through the time they had been together. So, in my last sermon here, I want to do the same. And I have it in my notes here to tell you that I might cry, but I think we're past that point. There is one part of our collective story that some of you know and some of you might not. And in fact, because of how much this congregation has shifted in the past 3 years, some of you weren't even a part of this congregation when it happened. A little over 3 years ago, as a seminary student, I was required to serve a congregation for 10 hours a week, paid or unpaid. I am so grateful for the program that Lexington Theological Seminary offers because it was the only way I was able to finish seminary with as much as we move. At the time, we were stationed at Fort Jackson in Columbia, South Carolina. And when my husband got orders for Fort Campbell, I Googled the disciples' churches near here and emailed the pastor. I remember feeling very nervous because I had to be at a church for seminary. I didn't have a choice, and I wasn't exactly sure what I would encounter. This week, in a fit of nostalgia, I looked up that first email. It began, "Good afternoon, Reverend Brown. My name is Sarah Fisher, and I am a student at Lexington Theological Seminary." I continued on, asking him if he would consider letting me intern here while I completed coursework. Little did we know. But here is the remarkable part of that story. Just before I sent that email, the youth director, Brian Miller, had resigned. I emailed back and forth with Nathan, followed by phone calls, and after we had gotten to know each other a little better, he said, "You know, I didn't tell you this at first, but we actually have an opening on staff. Do you think you would be interested?" Looking back, there's a lot that we didn't know 3 years ago. We didn't know how long I would be here. When I first arrived, 12 months was rather likely. We didn't know that my husband would deploy, though from Fort Campbell, that wasn't really a surprise. When I arrived 3 years ago, I walked into a church filled with anxiety because their senior minister was about to take sabbatical. There was a lot of uncertainty at that time. That spring, those what-if questions were on everyone's minds. What if there's a funeral? What if there's a conflict? What if the church gets struck by lightning? We didn't know how well this church would work together for those 3 months, what we would learn in those 3 months, and the church wasn't even hit by lightning. We didn't know about all of the staff transitions. Since I've been here, Pastor Jackie accepted a new call to Virginia. Jane McInnes, Sandy Cunningham, and Diane Beatty retired, and Jane Wells, Donna Chapman, and Pat Sunderland stepped into those roles. Whitney Joyner stepped down as our children's choir director, and Sylvia Carver stepped up. We added a youth choir with Holly Duker, and Jenny Fleming began filling in with children's ministries this summer. You might not know this, but in the 3 years I've been here, I alone have had 4 separate job titles. This church knows transition, and we've experienced the faithfulness of God through every one. 3 years ago, we didn't know how great of a fit we would all be for each other. We didn't know how much of a family you would become to my children. We didn't know that my leaving and Nathan's would align. And we didn't know how sad we would all be headed into this Advent. Some of the changes in the past 3 years we might have anticipated with the passing of time. Sarah Camp and Caitlin Shelton, those freshman girls I met on my first day, are, unsurprisingly, getting ready to graduate. With each passing year, as all of the youth have grown older, their questions have grown more challenging, their faith has grown more engaged. Then there's that group of 5th graders that I kept my eye on when I first arrived and welcomed as balls of anxious energy to youth group that fall, who are now emerging as leaders, not just in the youth group, but in the church as 8th graders. Whatever anxiety and uncertainty there is about the next chapter, let me tell you, you have amazing young people who are ready to help write it. Yes, we as a church are on the precipice and about to begin new seasons of our journeys. But the reality is, those are not the only decisions facing us today. I know and you know that this is not the only concern on our minds. Because we here gathered as a community, each Sunday morning when we meet in the same room, we bring the previous week's worth of joys and concerns and decisions and changes with us. And most of the time, the decisions we need to make aren't between following God and not following God, but rather how to follow God, how to faithfully live. Choosing whether or not to follow God isn't a once-in-a-lifetime decision. It is a choice today, and it's a choice tomorrow, and a choice on Tuesday, and a choice every day after that. Following God, serving God, loving God is a choice made every time we put the needs of others before our own. It's a choice made every time we stand up for someone being hurt. It is a choice made every time we give of ourselves and our resources. Choice after choice, we cultivate a lifetime of faithfulness to God. I don't know what God is calling you to do for the rest of your life, or 10 years from now, or really even next week, but I know that today, God is calling all of us, individually and as a church, to make disciples of Christ by sharing God's love in relationship. Reflection and response. You will continue to bring God's love to your workplaces, your schools, your civic engagement. People around Hopkinsville will continue to know this is a welcoming place because they know all of you. Every day brings new opportunities to bring the love of God to this community. The choice is yours. Remember that remarkable part of the story that when I emailed Pastor Nathan, Brian had just resigned? Guess who's coming back in 3 weeks? Brian and his wife Brandy will be returning to Hopkinsville, and he will be beginning his time at Lexington Theological Seminary. Somewhere, your next associate minister is on a precipice. Maybe already in search and call, he or she is wondering what the future holds, grappling with uncertainty in that liminal space of not yet. And somewhere, your next senior minister is on a precipice. She or he might be standing in a pulpit right at this moment, feeling a call from God, some nudge they don't understand to enter the search and call process. Pray for them. They are somewhere being prepared in ways they don't even know yet to help write the story of First Christian Church. They will arrive to a church not knowing what is ahead, not knowing if they will be a good fit, not knowing how long they will stay, and not knowing if you will become family. So as you wait, be strong and bold, because it is the Lord your God who goes with you. God will not fail you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed.